I'm about to show you my most favorite recipe to make. It's one I've been refining and perfecting for the past 15 years or more. It started a couple years after I tasted my first real French baguette. I was raised in the Midwest and had limited exposure to the world of bread. My first real baguette blew my mind so much. I went back to the bakery and asked them what they put in it, expecting to hear some magical game-changing ingredient. But the secret was in its utter simplicity. Flour, water, salt, yeast. That's it. Since then, I've been adapting the measurements, tools, techniques, and ingredients to what I can find in the United States and in a home kitchen setting until I got that taste and texture that now in my repeat visits to France is so familiar to me. This recipe makes 4 baguettes per batch. At the end of this video, I'll also show you how you can half bake and serve them fresh out of the oven later on demand. There's a few things you'll need for this recipe, but the most important one is time. This isn't a hard one to make, but there is a lot of waiting and coming back. Expect this to take about 3 to 4 hours in total. Start early in the morning and you'll have fresh baguettes for lunch. I promise it's worth it and it's multitasking friendly. Here's some other tools you'll need. A measuring cup, ideally one that measures 2 or more cups. A tablespoon. A stand-up mixer, or just use a big mixing bowl with standard kitchen tools for mixing. A nice large surface you don't mind getting dusty. Proofing cloth. A dough scraper. A baguette transfer board. A baguette tray for baking. An oven and an oven-safe bowl. Check out the description for links to the exact items I use if you're missing anything. The recipe itself is 2 3/4 cups of warm water. 1 tablespoon of yeast. In the States, I like to use Bob's Red Mill brand. This is easy to find and has given me the best results from all the yeasts I've tried. 1 tablespoon of salt. I prefer using French gray salt if you can find it, but ordinary iodized or Himalayan salt will do just fine too. 4 cups of white and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. There are 2 brands I like to use. One is King Arthur. The other I'm using today is Bob's Red Mill. They have a special one specifically for bread flour, but since I was only able to find their all-purpose white flour for the next batch, that's okay too. I like to use a stand-up mixer to make it easy, but it's totally fine if you use a regular mixing bowl. First, we have to get the yeast started, so we want to use water that is between 100 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't go above that, or you'll immediately kill the yeast. Pour that into the bowl and immediately add the yeast. Give the yeast a good mix until it's completely dissolved. Then we just let it sit for 10 minutes to start activating and forming CO2. With that done, you may see some activity on the surface of the water. We can now just add the rest of our ingredients and mix. With the mixer running, start with the salt so it can dissolve evenly in the water. After the salt has dissolved, I switch to the dough hook attachment for the remainder. Now throw in the flour and mix until you have a nice even consistency. In some bread recipes, the dough will ball up and separate from the walls of the bowl. It will be easy enough to just pick up from the bowl and toss around like a bean bag. Not in this recipe. It's expected that the dough will still be sticky and wet. We'll gradually add more flour to this as we're handling it in later steps. With that done, cover your mixer to prevent dust and other particles from getting in your dough, and let that sit for an hour and 20 minutes. It may not look like there are 4 baguettes in that dough, but prepare to be amazed how much this will grow. Once your timer is up, it's time to unload the dough. I like using these large cutting boards from IKEA that secure nicely to the countertop. For the rest of your preparation, keep your whole wheat flour readily available, as you'll be continuously sprinkling it on surfaces and the dough. Start by taking a pinch and lightly dusting the surface you'll be working on. Then use a spatula to scoop out the dough. Once it's unloaded, it's time for your first flip. To do this, grab your dough scraper and just plop one side of the dough onto the other like a taco. No kneading is necessary. Just flip like this, cover, and let sit for 20 minutes. I recommend writing down how many flips you've done somewhere as it's easy to lose track. This recipe is also designed to make it easy to do multiple batches without having to set a bunch of separate timers. So now would be a great time to use your now empty mixing bowl to start on a new batch if you're doing multiple. I don't clean out the bowl at this stage because we're about to put in the same ingredients again. Plus, everything we're preparing is going into a super hot oven. By the way, it's also fun to add different flavors to your baguettes. I recommend walnut, flaxseed, or rosemary, but there are plenty of different options. In terms of how much to add, honestly, I just eye it and try to keep it doughy at the end of the day. Be sure to do this once you start mixing your dough and not after it has proofed. By the time you've activated your yeast and mixed in your flour, this should be about the time your other timer for your first batch will go off. The remaining steps will be the same as the first batch, so for the rest of this video, we'll just focus on the one batch. Now that the timer has gone off, it's time to do another flip exactly as you did before, again setting the timer for 20 minutes. You'll do this 2 more times for a total of 4 flips. Skipping ahead after you've flipped 4 times with 20-minute timers after each flip, cut your dough into 4 roughly equal pieces. You could weigh each piece of dough to make sure they're equal, but I prefer to embrace the imperfection of each baguette looking a little differently and just try to get it as close as possible. Once you've done this, flip each of your 4 doughs, set another timer for 20 minutes, and cover. Now it's time for these balls of dough to start looking like actual baguettes. Fold each ball into thirds like a wallet. Then proceed to roll with your hands moving outward in a V shape. Don't force the dough to stretch outwards. Let the pressure of the board and your hands push them outwards and try to preserve any bubbles in the dough without popping. When this starts to look like a baguette, use the measurements on your transfer board or a tape measure to size these up to the length of your baguette tray for the oven. For most trays, this is about 15 inches. We're going to transfer these to your proofing cloth, so keep your transfer board handy. First, let's lay out our proofing cloth and get this ready. The proofing cloth wicks away moisture from the outside of the bread and gives it a nice crispy exterior. You should never wash your proofing cloth, as this will destroy it. Just pick out any dried-on dough and smooth it out with your hand to make sure it's free of debris. Every once in a while, you'll want to reinvigorate your cloth with a very thin, evenly distributed dusting of flour. Try not to handle the baguettes too much at this point, as you'll wrinkle their appearance. Instead, roll them onto the transfer board and never touch your baguettes again from this point on until they are out of the oven and cooled down. Use only the proofing cloth and the transfer board to move them. Roll these off the transfer board and onto the proofing cloth, keeping enough space in between them to fold the cloth upwards. This makes short walls that can touch the sides of the bread, so everything should be packed together with folds touching. Then when all 4 are placed, you'll just wrap the top of the cloth over all 4 of them. Let these sit for 40 to 45 minutes. When you have all your baguettes in the cloth, this is the right time to begin preheating the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll also want to place a long, flat dish full of water to the lowest shelf. This dish should be as close to the dimensions of the actual baguette tray as possible. Put in as much water as you can, as it will evaporate quickly. Make sure the shelf that holds your water and the shelf holding your baguette are as far away vertically from each other as possible. Time to bake. By now, your oven should be heated to the right temperature. First, 2 important safety tips I had to learn the hard way. Number 1, your oven is full of hot steam, so anytime you open its door from now on, you are going to get a face full of boiling hot steam. It's probably not going to injure you, but it's not pleasant. To avoid this, just open the door standing out of the way for about 3 seconds before you go in with the tray. Number 2, especially when cooking several batches, you may need to refill the basin. Do not under any circumstances pour more water into the same basin. The drastic temperature change could cause the basin to explode. Instead, just get a second basin full of room temperature water and place it in the oven, pushing the other one to the side. Now simply place the loaded baguette tray in the oven, trying to align it as if the water basin were its shadow. With everything else before this going so quickly, this is the fast part. The baguettes cook so quickly, We'll know they're done by looking at them. We aren't baking a cake here, so I don't recommend you set a timer and come back to take them out. Just keep checking on them through the oven window highly frequently. They are ready when you see so much browning that the occasional blackening starts to appear in some places. When these are done, remember to stand clear of the door to avoid the hot cloud of steam. Take out the tray and let them cool in the tray. Avoid the temptation to remove them from the tray while they are still hot. This will allow the bottoms to become nice and crispy. Nothing beats preparing, baking, and eating these baguettes fresh out of the oven. But there are a couple close seconds that allow you to enjoy these fresh. One baguette at a time over many days after having spent half a day or more making them. One way is just to freeze them right away in a linen baguette bag. I also have a link to these in the description. To thaw, place them in the oven at 275 for 30 minutes. Another way is to half bake them, freeze in the same way, and finish them off any other day once the guests have arrived. This method is great for parties, but for smaller audiences, I prefer to freeze after fully baking because this method uses up more energy fully heating up the oven. After you've started baking, wait until the bread has just started to show some browning. It's important to monitor them closely in this case because they cook quickly. Make sure these do not look too doughy. They should be able to be lifted off the tray once they've cooled down like a fully baked baguette. Place them in a linen bag and freeze. When baking to completion, you'll follow the same oven preparation steps as before. But make sure your frozen baguettes have fully defrosted first. Do not put the baguettes in frozen. Place a bowl of water and preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. I hope you'll enjoy this recipe and the taste of France in your own kitchen. Making baguettes is highly rewarding, but make sure you make enough of them because they will go quickly. Thank you for watching.